describe the way that it worked. I mean, you just go to Mexico, show up at a club, and say, "I want to try out." I mean, what was the process for even getting to that point? I'm also curious to know how Herculez Gomez gets a rep in town in Vegas that he can play. Let's pay him $100 to come play in our club team.
That was, well, first the rep in Vegas was just, you know, um, you wouldn't get a lot of crossover between club and amateur, men's amateur at that
Sorry,
time.
yeah.
And my dad thought I'd be good for the team, and I didn't want to play. I was 15, 16. I didn't want to play with these guys. I thought it was a waste of my time. And until it wasn't, until they started offering some money. And I was like, all right, I'll do this. So I started playing, and I think the first game I played, I scored a hat trick. Just started going to these games and scoring crazy goals. I mean, listen, Jason, you're playing with grown men, and a
Oh,
lot of,
sure.
these guys don't have the schedule I have. I was training every single day. I was a fit kid. I was running circles by them. I was scoring goals. But these people who would fund this team, they're like, yeah, I'll give this kid $100 to help me, win a game and whatnot. So it became fun. So a few of those players, by the way, back then in Vegas, and then probably to some extent still now, you would see these businessmen bring like second division Mexican players, first division Mexican players, like on their vacation to play.
That's
Like,
amazing.
yeah, Bud's Cup, like these men's tournaments get crazy and all these ringers and whatnot. So it's a whole like business on its own. And I'm sure those who've experienced it could tell you better than I could. I just, saw it as a way of making some extra
Well,
cash.
I,
So
I, I I know that my limited experience with that, never having actually interacted with that world, but having maybe seen something like it, not on that level. I don't think it's a cultural event. It's not just there's guys playing soccer. There's a whole party happening around all of that
absolutely.
that I think gets missed too. It's not just
It,
restaurant owner wants to win some games. People are coming out, families are camping, they're cooking, there's people selling food, all that stuff, right?
So it's funny you mentioned that. So you see these two guys that are in the picture with me. They're of El Salvadorian descent, and I used to play. I did one season with them in this El Salvadorian team called Guanacos. And to my understanding, a Guanaco is like the equivalent of like an Azteca or a Mayan, but in the
Right.
Salvadorian
Okay.
culture.
Yeah.
Um, we used to get hundreds of people to come out to these men's league games,
Yeah.
and every goal there'd be massive cheers, every nutmeg, every tackle, like just crazy, crazy environment. And here I am, like, this honorary El Salvadorian, um, because I'm playing for this team and I'm doing well for this team, and they're playing against a team, that's Honduran based. They're playing against a Mexican based team. They're playing against. I remember a team called Tie Inside, that was English based. There had a Newcastle jersey, So
Right.
it's crazy how these cultures would come to a head and you would play against each other. But yes, like you were saying, it was an event. It was literally their like local gathering. It was an event, and then
Yeah.
afterwards, it was just like a massive party, cookouts, restaurants, whatever the case may be. But it was always something. So going back to your original question, like I didn't have those avenues
Yeah.
of going elsewhere in the American setup. So it was like I know a guy who knows a guy who knew a guy who got me like a tryouts, because they do trials in Mexico, and I got there, and from there it was really like backpacking around until you made it.
That I mean that sounds like an incredible experience, like whether you make it or not. Going back to your photo here at the Azteca, like during this period in your life, again, you're pointing at the U.S. badge. Your boy's wearing a U.S. hat. We spend so much time talking about the pull of the different cultures and these kids who have to make choices. You and I have talked about that in other forums. What were your feelings about soccer? And I mean, at that point, what the U.S. had hosted a World Cup, failed at a World Cup. Obviously Mexican soccer was still dominant on the continent, even though the U.S. had a couple of successes. What was your feelings about, being pulled in both those directions?
It's conflicting, and I I see kids deal with it today. I mean, think about this for a second. Think about how fucked up this is. You're asking a teenager, you're asking a kid to out himself, identify himself to the rest of
Yeah.
the world. Like choose who are you right now. Was something that people like they could be in their 30s, 40s until this day are coming to terms with. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's a very strange feeling. Um, I'm the oldest of five. Mexican immigrants, first generation in this country, and I've always identified when high school people ask you like, "Oh, what are you?" I'm Mexican.
Right.
Same way that majority of people answer today. But now you're being asked, "What are you?" in a situation where you say Mexican. No, you're just Mexican. Now you're not American, and we're talking about a game. We're talking about soccer. So it was a
Yeah.
very difficult thing to kind of grasp back then. And I'm just lucky that social media didn't exist, because now you see the pressures, you see the avenues that these kids can be influenced by. You see how negative and toxic social media can be with these kids, and just in general, it's it's difficult. So here I am in this situation where I'm trying to make a name for myself in Mexico, just an opportunity, and I realize what this rivalry is. It's one thing. It's one
Yeah.
thing to see it on TV. It's one thing to maybe read about it, and kids today, the generation today, we have a very good, healthy understanding of what this rivalry has been and how it's gone back and forth for quite some time, and it's been competitive, right? That wasn't the case before.
Yeah.
That was not the case before. I'm old enough to remember when the U.S. used to get beat like 4, 5, 6, 7-0. Where certain players that I grew up watching a national team were never competitive players to the Mexican national team player. This is the reality. Um, all that has changed.
Yeah.
All that has changed because of where the programs are today, because of what had happened. But back then it wasn't. So around the time that I'm here was the pivotal shift between the two rivalries. This is 2001. 2002 was the day, or I should say the year, and most Mexicans could tell you the day they realized that this rivalry had turned and changed forever. That was the year, that was the World Cup tournament, that was the World Cup game, that was a World Cup minute, they will tell you. 2-0 when the
Yeah.
US knocked them out of a World Cup qualifier and kind of cemented themselves as like here in this rivalry. So I was very much in the thick of this. And this game, if memory serves me correct, was a Jared Borghetti goal. It was a
Mm.
1-0 win. Javier Aguirre had just come on into the fold. Javier Aguirre, who's with Mallorca right now, the head coach, to save them, to take them to the World Cup. They weren't doing so hot. So this was kind of a changing of the guards, but this game in particular, like a last ditch effort on the Mexican national team's part of getting to that World Cup. So it was a crazy kind of tension brewing in the stadium.
There may have this may have just I'm guessing this was just not that long, a couple of months probably after the game in Columbus when the U.S. beat Mexico at Cruz Stadium, which set up hold 2-0 and all that stuff. So yeah, that's the moment, and there you are again, rocking the U.S. stuff. I mean, um, with your background with Vegas, with the men's league, with all those things, having to find your way in soccer without having the opportunity. I mean, did you resent sort of the system as it existed? ODP with having to pay for it and college recruiting and all that. Did you resent any of that?
I don't even think I understood it.
Okay.
There was no room for resentment. I didn't understand it, and I guess this is sad, but I was a product of my circumstances. So you almost kind of grow to accept it. Like not that, never in my mind did it cross that I deserved better, the same opportunities. And
Okay.
now I think about it, and I'm like, why why would I not deserve this opportunity because I couldn't afford it? You know what I mean? Like if that is that what it's about? Because my
Right.
parents weren't aware of this, or even if they were, they would never pay for it for me to get there. Like it just never crossed my mind. But now I think of it, and it's not resent, but it's just like profound sadness for many kids in my situation. Think about how backwards we were, and I'm sure some will point out it was a necessity, so to speak, right? But we have this draft where back then the majority players in Major League Soccer would come out of this draft. I would say probably all of them would come out of this draft, incoming domestic players.
Yeah.
And you get your first taste of first team football at 21, 22, or 23 years of age. Like the rest of the world's like, what are you doing? That's way too late. You're way too old. If you've not made it by that age, you should be out of the game. Here we are introducing players to a professional setup at that age.
Mm.
Um, it was kind of strange because I'm in these two worlds, right? I'm trying to make it, and I see the kids. I mean, I've been in Mexico, professional player, first team player. I was at Pachuca. Great setup now as a player in Pachuca. Well, this is one of the crazy things is Pachuca said no to me as a third division player and then paid millions for me later in a transfer fee, after I won a goal scoring title with Puebla. So I am there. And one of my teammates debuted at 15 years of age.
Yeah.
15. This is the rest of the world. So everything opens my eyes. Being there, even though I wasn't in the setup yet, like opens my eyes to just what football is. So it's. I don't think I resented it by any means, but it definitely made me feel some type of way that it was like that.
So you didn't necessarily resent what was going on in the U.S. because you didn't understand it, and obviously, sort of just ignorance, not knowing, naive to that. But in Mexico, there's a path, and you go there, and you're trying to catch on. Do you now? I mean, obviously, that wasn't ultimately at the beginning of your career, right? You didn't end up catching on in Mexico and stay there, and you ended up going back later. Do you think about, if somebody had given me a chance at that point, what would your path have been? Had you think about those things? If you had a
No,
passport, if you were able to stick around.
no, I don't because I think things worked out the way they would have. Not there. I think about them now in the sense of I got to do some cool things in my career. But there's a contingent of fans today that would never really know about it, right? And if I did what I did in my career then now, as a 21-year-old developmental player and being the team MVP of a team that in Major League Soccer won two trophies in 1 year, the Open Cup and MLS Cup, and I came onto the scene in June, and by the end of the season in November, I led the team in goals in both the Open Cup and MLS.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be Bundesliga teams knocking on my door. There'd be, like, you know what I mean? There would be all
Yeah.
the types of teams like, hey, especially now in today's climate, how the American player is viewed, like there could have been a different avenue and different choices for me. Like I had a choice later on in my life to go play in Europe, but if I had that choice when I was 20, 21
Mm-hmm.
and doing well, and listen, I think I became the team MVP that year in '05. And I went from making 12,600 a year net or gross, excuse me, to making 52. They raised me to 52. Like, hey kid, congrats. Here's 52 grand. Like, do you know what I mean? Knowing what I know now, like
Yeah.
that's just the way it was, and you had to
Yeah.
accept it. They had you by the balls. They're like, here's another 4 year we picked up all your options. Congrats. That wouldn't happen today. So I think about those things, but everything worked out the way it did. And I'm happy for that. I had a great time in my second stint in Mexico.
Right.
By no means is it a cheap property. They pay very well. So I enjoyed my time, but it definitely one of those situations like what had happened then if it happens now, but not in the sense of if I made it when I was 18 in Mexico, that
Yeah.
first go around.
Well, what was the, it seems like you enjoyed it, but what was the reception like to a Mexican American? I mean, nowadays it's like, oh, these Mexican American kids, they grow up in the U.S., they play for MLS teams, they get recruited by the Mexican national team and make a big deal out of it. You're 18, 19 years old. You're from Vegas, so you're, by Mexican standards, you're very American. What's the response to you?
So it's funny. I always tell people because when I'm in these setups, I go to a new club. So now that I'm a known player, even when you're a known player, that which is crazy. I had won a goal scoring title in Puebla, and I was a bit of a known commodity now in Liga MX. People, very easy and recognizable name. It's not too many Hercules is going around in the world, so you'll
Not a lot.
identify. And Jason, you're the Gringo. You're El Gringo. They identify you as El Gringo.
Yeah.
I go to a certain club, and I always felt like El Gringo. I always felt like the American playing in that club or in that city, and oftentimes when you go into a setup, you already signed your contract, you're already getting paid your wages, you're part of the team, but you don't feel part of the team within that first week. The players don't pass you the ball. Some players don't talk to you, but then you
Yeah.
realize it has nothing to do with your nationality, but it has everything to do with because you're taking food off somebody's plate,
Yeah.
either the person you're trying to take their position or the friend of, and it's very cutthroat. It's a very cutthroat business. But once you prove yourself, you're still El Gringo, but you're their Gringo.